Eyes on Longmont, offering a diversity of topics about our community that will inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy this edition of Eyes on Longmont.
Hello Longmont, welcome to my house. My name is Mark Heiss and I build Boulder mandolins. I've got my workshop in the basement and I'd like you to come on inside and see how mandolins get made. Hi, my name is Mark Heiss. Welcome to my home and welcome to this video about building bluegrass mandolins. I started playing mandolin myself when I was a junior in high school. I previously had played guitar and some bass guitar, but I was really intrigued by the sound of the mandolin and also the way the instrument looked. I thought it was a really beautiful looking instrument. So I picked one up and started playing mostly folk music with friends and stuff like that. You know, old Crosby, Stills and Nash songs and Joni Mitchell and those kind of folk kind of tunes. And I've been playing on and off over the years, and I've bought and sold mandolins on and off during the years. I haven't really played most of my life, I guess I'd say. Most of the time the mandolins I bought have spent most of their time under my bed collecting dust. But in 1999 I decided I was in the market for a new mandolin, wanted to play some more music, and I started shopping around at the music stores and got sticker shock. The price of mandolins has gone up quite a bit during the 90s. And so I got the idea that maybe I could build my own mandolin. I built some dulcimers back when I was in college and had some woodworking skills and tools. So I decided I'd build a mandolin. I bought a book and watched videos and talked to people. I also decided if I could build the instrument, maybe my brother-in-law could finish it off for me. He's a furniture finisher. And so that's what I did. I built the first instrument and gave it to him, and he put a nice lacquer finish on it. It was a really nice instrument. I still have it. But it's one of those things where after you build the first one, you learn so much and tell yourself, well, next time, if I ever have a chance to do this again, this is what I'm going to do differently. And so I built the second one, and in that process learned more about what to do and what not to do, or how to do something better. And then just over time started building more and more, started selling the instruments. I don't know if I've made a profit selling mandolins yet, because every time I sell one, I buy another saw or sander or some kind of tool that helps me build the instrument. My basement's filled, as you'll see, with stuff, machines. But anyway, so that's what happened, and I just started building and selling, and some of the music stores here in Colorado and Arvada and Boulder have carried my instruments. And right now, number 30 mandolin is on my workbench. I'd say I build 2 a year. It's a very part-time thing. It's a hobby, something I do for fun. But I've gotten more serious about playing the instrument. I play bluegrass mostly. Last probably 5 years started getting more serious about learning how to play bluegrass. And then about 2 years ago got together with some guys and we formed a bluegrass band called Weld County Ramblers. And we play just mostly around here in Colorado. If you know where the Niwot Powder Keg brew pub is, we play there quite a bit. Regent Retirement Home, we've played up at Avogadro's. We played for the Longmont Art Walk. Let's see, Biscuit Days in Erie, we played for Biscuit Days. But anyway, stuff like that. We play for fun, and it's a great time, and it's forced me to become a better mandolin player, and gives me a chance to kind of play what I'm building, and it's a nice combination to I guess for me personally, to be able to play an instrument that I've made myself and enjoy. Thank you for being a part of this, and I hope you join me downstairs here now in a few moments to see how a bluegrass mandolin is created. Hi, welcome to my mandolin shop here in the basement of my house. The mandolins I build basically come in two styles. This style here is called an A model. This is one I built for my daughter. It's pretty simple in shape. And then the second style that I typically build is called an F style mandolin. Acoustically, sound-wise, the two styles of mandolin sound about the same. The only real difference, and the reason this is called the F style, is because of some of the fancy accompaniments here on the top with the scroll, and on the headstock there's a little bit more scroll work. It's just a kind of a fancier instrument, I guess I would say. But in terms of sound, they're essentially the same. So this is what the finished product looks like. These are A and F mandolins, and I'm going to take you through the process of how they get built. Well, the mandolin begins as raw wood. This wood right here that I have in my hands is spruce. In particular, it's Engelmann spruce. Spruce wood is typically used for the tops of violins and guitars and basses, cellos, things like that. It's been found to have a really nice resonance and has been used for hundreds of years in building musical instruments. This piece of wood, as you can see, is a slice out of a log. And then what happens here, somebody cut that slice in half. These two pieces will get glued together like this. And then this will be the top of a mandolin. It will be carved, rough carved into the top of a mandolin. The back of a mandolin and the sides and the neck are typically made out of maple. There's all different kinds of maple. This particular piece of maple is going to make a really nice mandolin back. It's some bird's eye maple. Inside the mandolin we use mahogany to create the fitting to allow the neck to be attached to the body of the instrument. And that's what this mahogany is used for. And then finally, this is a simple fretboard. This is made out of ebony wood. These little grooves that have been carved in there are for the frets, and the frets will be attached to this, and then this will be attached to the neck of the mandolin to help it make the music it needs to make. So after the wood's been glued together, the wood is then carved into the rough shape. This, for example, is spruce, and this has been glued and rough carved into the shape of a mandolin top. This can be done in a variety of ways. Many people carve these by hand with chisels. It can be done with grinding tools, with sanders. I have a friend who's got a CNC machine, and he uses a computer-generated software to carve out the rough shape of the mandolin top. And then here's a back. This is the back of a mandolin that's been rough carved on a CNC machine. This is just an exceptional piece of wood. This again is maple. You can see a lot of character in this. This is called quilted maple. And you can see from the outside that what the original thickness of the piece of maple was. So these will be used, and I'll sand these down, trim them down to the perfect thickness for the top and the back of a mandolin. This part of the instrument is called the rim assembly. As you can see, it's in the basic shape of a mandolin. This is maple wood that's been shaped in a mold to serve as the rim assembly to hold the top and the back of the instrument together. You're probably wondering how a piece of wood turns into something that looks like that. I mean, wood is pretty stiff and not very bendable, and typically if you bend it very far, it'll snap. So there's a process by where the wood can be shaped into the shape of a mandolin. So I'm using a propane torch and a pipe. I'll be superheating this pipe. And once this pipe is hot, I'm going to be taking a piece of wood that I've let soak overnight. And I'll be bending that into the shape of a mandolin. So now we're going to let this pipe heat up. What I have here is the rim assembly. You can see that this is the outside shape of a mandolin, and this will serve as the mold that'll hold the wood in place while it dries after I bend it, so it'll be in the appropriate shape for the outside of the mandolin. So here's a piece of wood that's been bent across this pipe in a previous session. This is some side wood. You can see it's about, I guess, about 1/8 of an inch thick, approximately. It's been soaked overnight. I'm going to be using a bending strap, which is what this metal piece is here. It's a flexible piece of metal. And this strap will help me to bend the wood around this hot pipe. What will happen is the soaked wood is going to be emitting steam as I bend it over the pipe, and this metal strap helps hold the steam in so that the wood will bend. See how warm this is. Well, it's already nice and warm. You can hear it sizzling a little bit. So I'm going to slowly work this piece of wood with the bending strap to give it a curve. I don't want to work too fast because I don't want the wood to snap. I'm going to let the heat and the steam do the work. So you can see this is bending a little bit already. The wood's getting a nice little curve in it. I'm working it fairly slowly. I don't want to go too fast. What we're going to make here is 1/2 of the rim assembly for this F-style mandolin. You can hear the steam being produced. So this metal strap keeps the steam from leaving the wood, and it's trapped inside the wood, and it opens up the cells and the pores inside the wood and makes them flexible. So we get a nice bend in the wood here. So this part of the side is going to be for the lower bout of the mandolin. So now this is nice and flexible, and it'll bend very nicely into this shape here. I'm going to bend the upper end of the rim, and this will be for the small scroll that's here in the top part of the F-style mandolin. This pipe that I'm using is almost the exact same diameter as this scroll, so it works really well for bending the scroll portion. But I need to take my time, because if the rim's going to break, it's in bending this very small scroll. This is where most builders have a hard time with F-style mandolins, because that's a really skinny little scroll to bend a piece of wood into, no matter how wet it is. So I'm going to take my time here and make sure I get it right. And you see I'm really getting a kind of a tighter bend on this one. But it's the heat and the steam that's allowing the wood to bend like that without breaking. I don't want to break it, nor do I want to crack it in any way. I want it to stay a solid piece of wood, keeping its integrity. Yeah, this is not a laminated piece of wood. This is a solid piece of wood that I'm bending across this pipe right now. Now you notice there's kind of a reverse curve that's in part of the assembly, so I'm going to bend that curve now for this side piece. I want to take my time, not do it too fast, not rush it, let the heat do the job. Let the steam do the job. Okay, now I'm going to do the tight scroll one more time to make sure it's nice and flexible for putting into this mold. You can see I can almost bend it all the way around the pipe now. One of the things we have to be careful of when we're using this pipe, it can actually burn the wood. And I don't want to leave any scorch marks on the wood, especially on the outside. On the inside, that'd be tolerable. So now this is ready to be fit into the mold. So I'm going to put this scroll up in the upper part of the mold, and then I'll put the remainder into the rest of the mold. I think I made that a little too far in one direction. Let me get this right. So now you can see this bends a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is I have the inside of the mold. I'm going to use a clamp to hold this in place. And this is the piece here that's going to go inside the mold to hold the rim in place while it dries. It'll dry into the perfect shape of a mandolin. Use a couple more clamps to get this scroll on the top right. But you can see the idea that the clamps will hold this in place while the wood dries, and then the wood will be in the shape of a mandolin. I'm going to clamp this later, clamp this just to make sure this upper scroll stays straight too. And then we'll be bending more wood to create the other side of the rim. When it's finished, it'll look something like this. This is a head block that hasn't been installed yet, but this is that piece of mahogany, and this is where the neck will attach to the body. This material around the edge of the rim is called kerfing. Here's some here. And this is wood that's had some little grooves cut in it so it would bend. And this is glued around the edge of the rim so that the top and the back can be glued to the rim assembly. So when that's glued together, it'll look something like this. So here's a rim assembly that has had the top glued onto it. These are called tone bars. These are glued to the top of the instrument. They give it both strength and they help with its sound as well. You can see the F-holes have been cut in this top, and we'll be looking at that in a moment. Well, here's a rough carved mandolin top, again Engelmann spruce, just to give you an idea of what the rough carved top looked like. To save time, I've used another top, and I've taped this jig to the back of it. This is a tool I used for cutting the F-holes on the instrument. And this piece of plexiglass is the jig that I use. I've drawn a pencil line down the center of the plate. I'm on the inside of the plate at this point, I can hear. And these little holes let me line up exactly where the center of the top plate is. And then I'm going to use this tool to cut out this F-hole shape in the top of the instrument. So what will happen here is this jig, or this piece of plexiglass, is going to run along the edges of this little nail that's been hammered into this board. And that's going to keep the routing piece on track to carve out an F-hole for this particular mandolin top. I apologize, this is going to be kind of noisy, but I'll show you how. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this down very carefully and follow the outline of the plexiglass jig that's inside here. And you can see it, kind of get a basic idea of what I'm going to be doing, except when I'm doing this little drill bit's going to be down carving the wood out. So now I'm in the slot there for the F-hole. we can see we're getting there. And the idea is to create an F-hole by routing it out like that. After the F-hole's been completely cut out by the Dremel tool, I'll use a file to clean up the edges, and then we'll have a nice F-hole. Then what happens is this plexiglass plate gets taken off and flipped over on the other side, and these holes lined up in the same place so that the F-hole on this side is in the exact same location relative to the center of the instrument as this F-hole. Now the thickness of the top of the instrument, I'd say, is approximately 1/4 inch in the center and about a 1/10 of an inch around what's called the recurve, this rim area. And it's the thickness of the top and its vibration that creates the tone and the volume of the instrument. They say that the thinner you get the top, the better the tone, the better the volume. The problem is there's a breaking point at which the top will cave in, and then you don't have a mandolin at all. So the way that I do the thicknessing, I've roughly thicknessed this to the right thickness, but to get it perfect, I work off a blueprint. I use a special computer tool that helps me create the right thickness for the top. This is a tool that was designed for violin makers, but a lot of other musical instrument makers have found it to be extremely helpful. You know, it's a strange looking thing, but it's wonderful. So when this is essentially, this isn't all built yet, but when it's, you know, coming closer to being completed, I use this probe. This will be plugged into my computer, and there's software on my computer, and this gives me a readout of how thick the top is in different places, so I can get it to the exact thickness. So this is a little magnetic ball that attaches to the probe, and what happens is I'm going to put it inside the top, and I can run this probe around the top of the instrument, and is at every point. And that way I can use some sandpaper and get the thickness to the exact thickness that I want for the top and the back of the mandolin. So I don't know if you can see from in there, but you can see that there's the little metal ball is just kind of rolling around. And as it rolls around, it gives me a reading as to what the thickness is in that particular part of the mandolin. Well, this is just a part of the mandolin. Top, there's no back on it yet, but before you can put a back on a mandolin, you have to attach the neck, and the neck is either made out of one piece of wood or several pieces of wood laminated together, and it has a joint and a shape, and that's how it attaches to the instrument. So how do you get from a block of wood to something that looks like this? Here's a block of wood, and what happens is, here's how the neck is made. This is a neck template here, and I'll put this piece of wood isn't big enough for a neck, but it's just for demonstration purposes. So I'll put this template on this block of wood. I'll use my pencil, and I'll draw the outline of what I want to cut on this block of wood. And this creates a profile of a mandolin neck. So you can see somewhat the shape of a neck. It's a side profile. So what will happen is I'll put this on the bandsaw and I'll cut it into this shape, which is the side profile of a mandolin neck. But as you can see, that's not a neck yet that way. There needs to be more shaping. So what happens next, I have another template that I'll put on top of here that I'll put this again on the bandsaw, and I'll cut this into the shape of a neck, head-on profile. And then the final product looks something like this. You can see there's kind of a fancy scroll on the top. this little channel here is for what's called a truss rod. The truss rod is a piece of metal that will be installed in here and then covered with another piece of maple. And then it will be screwed down or tightened down with what's called a truss rod wrench. There's a little nut on there, and you'll notice this on guitars and mandolins and banjos. They'll have a little kind of a plastic cap here. Well, that's the cover for our truss rod. And what this does is you can tighten this up to keep the neck from bending or bowing. You want to keep the neck as flat as you can get it. And I do want to show you how to cut this this dovetail joint that fits into the head block on the instrument. That's a pretty important joint because this determines the angle of the neck, which has to be perfect. It has to be perfect this way, and it also has to be perfect this way. So there's a lot of handwork that goes into getting it just right. I developed this little jig to help me create the dovetail joint. So this is the width of a neck. This is a template that's plexiglass that I've cut out, and this gives me a sense of what the width of the mandolin neck needs to be. So I'll be putting this on a bandsaw and cutting that shape out on the neck. And then here at the very bottom of this template is the shape I need to create the dovetail joint. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this neck is approximately the shape it needs to be. I'm going to take the sharpest pencil I can find, a mechanical pencil, and I don't know if you can see this, and I'm going to outline the shape I need to cut for the joint. So I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but there's some pencil lines on there that outline the shape of the dovetail joint. Now the joint is kind of complex because it's not a square joint. It's got an angle to it, you can see. So it snugs down into this, and this has an angle on it too. And they kind of fit together like maybe a jigsaw puzzle, but there needs to be a tightness there, and they bind with each other, and you want a good tight fit. When the instrument's complete, so it doesn't come apart or so it's it doesn't bend. So I've created this little birdhouse thing here. This is my dovetail joint jig. You can see it's got a little bit of an angle on the bottom. This is the bottom, and it's got a little bit of an angle this way too, so that because the neck has an angle as it approaches the dovetail joint. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this neck inside the birdhouse, and then I'm going to be using some clamps to hold it in place, and I'll be taking it over to the bandsaw to cut the dovetail joint. Well, this is the neck now that's been inserted in this little bird cage jig I created. You can see it's got the bottom on this is beveled. So this allows me when I go in here, because I want the little dovetail to have a little bit of an angle on it. So when I come in here and cut it, depending on which side I'm going to cut, I'm going to tilt this bird cage. I'm going to turn it on now. We'll see how loud it is for the cameras. Now I'm going to cut the dovetail joint. Cut that side leaning on this side of the jig. Now I'm going to lean the other side of the jig and cut the other side of the dovetail. that's the dovetail that's been cut. It's very rough at this point, but what will happen here is it'll fit into this part of the instrument, and I'll use files and sandpaper to get a nice tight fit to get that into its final position. But that's a pretty critical joint on building a mandolin, because you want this to be tight, something that doesn't fall apart, and everything has to line up just perfectly, both horizontally and vertically. After the instrument is assembled, this instrument is not completely assembled yet, but after the instrument is assembled, there's some finishing pieces that get taken care of. You'll notice on the outside of the mandolin, in guitars that you'll have this too, there's some binding that goes around the outside edges that's both protective of the instrument and also decorative. This is kind of stiff, and this gets bent not over the hot pipe, but boil water, and then you can bend this into the shape you need in boiling water. In order to accommodate the binding, this is a binding tool I have. There'll be a Dremel tool with a cutting blade on it I'll attach to this. And then I'll adjust it, and then this will be used to route a binding all the way around the outside of the instrument on the top. And then once the back is attached, this same tool will be used to route a binding channel in the back. And then the binding material itself gets glued into that space and held in place with some tape. You notice that the top of the mandolin, called the peghead, is black, and it has some fancy stuff in there. Not only does it have binding around it, but there's some mother of pearl and some abalone shell, and then the name of my company, Boulder, right there inlaid in the wood. So the top wood is ebony, the peghead wood. So I'll be using a piece of wood like this. You can see it's kind of outlined. It will be glued to the peghead like that, and then once it's cut out, I'll be using different inlay material. You know, it's mostly design. This is what I have here in this package is some mother of pearl shapes that I've had cut out for me. Somebody else cuts these. I don't cut them. There are a lot of builders that cut their own, but it's an incredible amount of work, and it's very inexpensive to buy these. So what I'll do is I'll kind of create a pattern or design like this, and I'll put the logo for my company on the top here. I'll do a better job than I'm doing right now. So what will happen, here's what's going to happen. So when this is actually on the instrument, I'll spray a light adhesive on here, and then I'll position these pieces of mother of pearl in the place that I want them exactly. Then I'll take some light white spray paint, and I'll spray a light coat of white on here. Then I'll take these off, and at least behind the shadow of these designs. And then I use a little tool to drill out the pattern for the words and for the design, and they get glued in there. And then I sand those perfectly flat, and then eventually it gets lacquered and turns into a really nice peghead for an instrument. You know, the instrument has to have a fretboard on it as well, otherwise you can't make any music. These are just some old fretboards that I took off of other instruments, but that gives you an idea of what that will look like. This fretboard's got some nice little diamonds in it, but you can tell it's old and a little bit worn. This is one of my favorites. I'm trying to restore it. I broke it. Somebody else did this inlay design for me, but there's a nice vine going up the inside of the fret, between the frets, and it's really pretty, but it needs some work. But anyway, that's the fretboard, and this will eventually be attached to the neck. Then the other hardware to finish the instrument off, you need to have a bridge. The bridge will eventually be set on the instrument. This has to fit perfectly. There's a special tool I use to get this to fit just right. Then there's a tail piece that will go on the end of the instrument, so you can attach the strings to the instrument. And then you'll also need some tuners. These tuners have to go through the holes on the peg head, and this lets you tune the instrument when you string it up. And I think that might cover this part of it. When the instrument is fully built and after it's been sunburst, then the instrument gets about 10 to 12 coats of lacquer. And that lacquer gets sanded down toward the end of the coating process. What I usually do is I do a coat in the morning and a coat in the evening for about a week. Sand that down so you don't really have a final finish of 10 or 12 coats of lacquer. It's much thinner than that. Then that lacquer has to sit and dry for about 5 weeks. And then after the lacquer's had a chance to dry for 5 weeks, then you can do some real fine sanding and start buffing and finally polishing the instrument out. And then you've got a mandolin. This is a mandolin I built about 10 years ago, and I've been wanting to refinish it. So the back on this one again is some nice quilted maple that's been stained a medium brown. And what I'm going to do now is do the sunburst. You've seen this kind of sunburst effect on some guitars and almost on all mandolins, where it fades from brown to a black around the rim. So I'm going to show you how we do that with a spray gun. It's going to be noisy. That gives you a pretty good idea of how we get a sunburst finish on a mandolin. I'll do the front side of this eventually, and also on the neck that usually gets a burst. You can see there's a bit of a burst here. This is black up here, and there's more of the brown here, and then more black here. Typically on a mandolin this will be very woody looking, and then again the black here. So there's a whole pattern that gets followed when doing sunburst on the mandolin. After the sunburst is done, the tape gets taken off, and then a razor blade is used to scrape all the finish off the binding that's been glued around the edges of this instrument. It all has to be done by hand. That's the only way you can do it. So you take a razor blade, and it takes a couple hours usually. You just scrape the black paint that's been painted onto the binding. Then after that's done, the process of lacquering the instrument begins. It takes about, I guess, 5 days to a week to put the basic finish on the instrument. From here I'll be spraying this with lacquer once in the morning, once in the evening, one coat each time for 5 to 7 days. So I'll get 10 to 12 layers of lacquer on here. But it's not going to be thick because there's going to be a lot of sanding. Because you want to keep the finish as thin as possible so that the instrument can resonate. So what will happen is that this will get a lacquer finish for 5 to 12 5 days to a week. Once in the morning, once in the evening. It'll be all sanded down. It'll be sanded down with very fine sandpaper. And then once it's to that place, then it just sits for about 5 weeks because lacquer takes quite a while to dry. Sits for 5 weeks, and then after that has happened, then it gets some real fine sanding, and the whole polishing business begins, and then eventually you get a nice glossy finish on the outside of the entire instrument. There's no waxes or anything like that used. That's all just buffing out lacquer. It shines like you won't believe. So thanks for coming into my shop. Thanks for checking this out and observing how some of the basics involved in creating a mandolin, and I hope you enjoyed our time together. Well, thanks for coming out and watching this video about building bluegrass mandolins. I've had a good time. I do it because it's just a lot of fun, and music is so refreshing. You know, somebody said next to silence, music comes the closest to expressing the inexpressible, and I think something happens to us all when we play and listen to music, and whoever you are and whatever you play, mandolin or not, I hope you enjoy music and have a wonderful time this afternoon and this evening. Thanks for being here. Well, Longmont, thank you for coming by. I hope you enjoyed this video about learning how to build mandolins, and have a wonderful day.